New figures released this morning reveal a squeeze in living standards as wage rises have fallen below inflation. The Office for National Statistics reports that average wages, excluding bonuses, grew by 2.2% in the 3 months to February. That's just less than yesterday's inflation figure for February, which was 2.3%. So are things worse than ever for the squeezed middle? Well, joining us now to discuss from Westminster, Alice Martin, who is from the New Economics Foundation, and Ben Southwood, Head of Research at the Adam Smith Institute. Thank you both very much for joining us. Alice, to you first. On the surface, inflation is relatively stable. Yes, wage growth has dropped below inflation levels, but only marginally, not nearly as bad as it was during the economic crisis. Are things really that bad?
Well, what we're really seeing here is a triple crunch on people's living standards. So, as we've heard, inflation remains up this month. That means that real wages have suffered, they're down, and this follows almost a decade now of the worst wage growth that we've seen in a century. And the result of that has been more and more people turning to debt, high-cost credit, just to get by, to make ends meet. So we're seeing now people paying for their weekly food shopping with credit cards, with high-cost credit cards, paying their bills. And the evidence is there that this economy is really not working now for the majority of people.
There we are, Ben Southwood. It's a ticking time bomb. We're all living off tick, aren't we?
So I don't disagree with everything that was just said. But I think one of the ways we need to look at the labour market is, over recent years, we have seen steadily increasing employment, decreasing unemployment, and lots of more detailed, more complex measures that are under the surface, like the number of part-timers that can't find full-time work. That's coming down to the lowest it's been in years. The number of temporary workers who can't find permanent work but are looking for it. Again, that's coming down.
Sorry to interrupt you, Ben, but isn't that just because the old part-time jobs that we used to have been replaced with zero-hour contracts? So employers might just have somebody for 3 hours one week, 20 hours the next, and they don't need somebody on part-time at 15 every week.
So that would be counted as part-time in the ONS figures. So it doesn't reflect that. What we're seeing is basically massive increases in part-time jobs, but also even bigger increases in full-time jobs for most of the recent releases. And we've hit the highest employment rate we've ever had in our history since figures began, and the highest total employment we've ever had. Now, partly that's due to that if you look down into splitting it between men and women, men have gone down in their employment rate, women have gone massively up. But overall, what we're seeing is far more people in work. Now, it is definitely a bad thing that we've seen such slow real wage growth over the last 10 years. However, having a job is much better than having no job, even including relatively poor real wage growth. So I think that there are serious problems in the economy now to do with productivity especially, which is the main driver of real wages, but we need to look at the bigger picture, which is we are basically doing a good job of getting people into jobs.
Alice Martin, is that a fair point? At least because we have these high employment figures, it does at least mean that more and more people are at least working.
I think we need to be asking the question that if more people are moving into work, why are they not able to afford their basic living costs? Why are they turning to credit for things like putting food on the table or heating their home? I think it's not the right thing to be celebrating low unemployment levels when we see that so many people are struggling to get by. The low unemployment levels mask a whole raft of people still in insecure, poorly paid work. Also, the statistics out today showed that people in full-time work are actually taking on more hours just to make ends meet. So what we're seeing is lots of in-work poverty, and I don't think that's something to celebrate.
The hidden costs, Ben Southwood, that Alice refers to is something that has been talked about, isn't it? I mean, today we're looking at the fact that some supermarkets are charging a lot more, higher above inflation for all sorts of items that we don't buy very often, things like light bulbs, things that you might not notice the weekly price of. That is a factor, isn't it? I mean, we see EDF today announcing almost a 10% increase in some of its bills. There are hidden costs and there are costs of living, and that is going up, and that is creating the squeeze, isn't it, Ben?
So costs of living are one side of the equation. You get wages, you use them to spend on things. Obviously, it's good for your wages to go up, but it doesn't matter if all the prices go up by the same amount. Totally agree with all of that. The problem is that our labour isn't getting worth more. So most of pay is determined by how much you can produce for the employer. Obviously, over time, there's lots of complex effects that set pay rates, but also the main trend is basically productivity. What we've had over the last 10 years is a productivity puzzle, and we haven't been quite sure why productivity has been growing in the last 10 years much slower than the previous 40 years. Now, if we can solve that, we could probably solve the whole problem. One suggestion is that we've got a bunch of really good superstar firms where productivity is increasing very quickly, but we're not reallocating workers and machines and know-how and land between these firms. And if we can solve that, we can solve the problem. I don't think that things like food or energy prices are things that we have a good grasp on, because most of those costs come from outside of the UK by forces on the world market that we can't control. What we want to do is make ourselves better at stuff so we earn more.
I suppose, Ben, though, people who are struggling to pay their weekly food bill, that will come as no comfort to them, will it? That a lot of those prices are outside our government's control, because they're certainly outside of their budget now.
Absolutely. This is why we have schemes like tax credits and so on. And this is why it's very important to top up the wages of people at the bottom end when we are seeing poor productivity growth and therefore poor wage growth. However, there's no simple answer.
Okay, Alice? I'd like to question that link, actually, between productivity and low wages. If you look across a number of other developed economies, there isn't a consistent link between productivity and wages. It's just not the case to say that if we produce more, we'll get paid more. And I think the bigger point that we should be making here is that really it's consumer spending that has been the last pillar defending us from a serious economic downturn since the Brexit vote. And if people are feeling this squeeze more and more, if there's less money in people's pockets to spend, we all need to be worried, because actually the economy is at risk here. So I think deflecting this by talking about kind of prices being outside of people's controls is a little bit of a smokescreen. I think really we need to be thinking about what money people have in their pockets to spend on the things that they need, and at the moment that's going down.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to leave it there. Alice Martin and Ben Southwood, thank you both very much.